hi, and welcome to Afterthoughts with Kaylee and
Aiden.
Woo.
This is your last one?
It is.
Wow. Unless you like guest preacher.
Okay, yeah. My last one hosting.
Yeah.
Fun. I'm glad we get to do this. So why don't you, and I'm glad it's for the first one of your, that you get, you doing Ecclesiastes.
That's true.
Sweet.
That's true. I haven't done it yet.
I'm looking forward to it. Or I have enjoyed it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Can you give us a recap of what you talked about?
Yeah, really quickly, and I'll try to be quick. We are continuing Ecclesiastes, so we're in chapter 3 now, and we've been listening to the teacher teach, and so now he dives into the idea of times and control and what that looks like in reality. And I find it's easy to read Ecclesiastes and feel like this guy's just depressed and sad, but I find that he's actually, the further you dive into and study, he's actually just someone who's being very honest in a way that very few of us, especially in the West, are actually comfortable with. And so he dives into the reality of time, and I talked about how I had my first panic attack, and I was kind of reminded of it by watching the Fantastic Four movie, because I thought about how we live on a giant floating ball in a universe of even more giant floating balls, and how small you actually are and how little control you have over your life. And I thought way back when I was a teenager about how if the sun were to explode or if something were to happen, there's literally nothing I can do. I have no control in how fast for all the different stuff. And it led me to actually having my first panic attack at a Bible camp. And I didn't know what a panic attack was at the time. But it's because I think we live in such a culture that's used to control and feeling like you're in control, that to realize how little you have is very disorienting. And this entire passage is actually about that, but trying to encourage you that you're not in control, and that's actually not the worst thing in the world. It just is what it is. And so my main idea was that it's that you're not in control. And so we looked at a very famous passage in Ecclesiastes. That was a song that was long before my time by a band called The Byrds, and I don't really know it. But they essentially just sang this poem that the author of Ecclesiastes has here. And it's a poem about how there's a time for this and there's a time for that. And he goes through all these different things. And I think it's helpful. And on the surface, it can feel very nice. Where you read and you go, oh, this is a nice poem. There's a time for this. There's a time for this. But when you really read what he's saying, it's very intense. That he talks about right at the beginning, that there are things that happen in our lives that are appointed, which essentially means they're just like given to us without any of your control. And you can find yourself in a time of laughter, or you can find yourself without anything in your power in a time of mourning. You can find yourself in a time of war or a time of peace. And there's all these different things in our lives that we face. And what he's trying to get us to realize is that we actually have no control over what time and season we have. There's little things we do that make us feel like we can maybe control it, but we really can't. I remember when my daughter was being born in the hospital, I thought about how in the same building where life that has no choice as to whether it's showing up or not, my daughter had no say and no part in her being alive, is happening. The same thing on the other end of the spectrum is happening in the same building of people who have no choice and no ability to stop themselves dying. It just is happening to them. Is happening, and you get both of those moments, which I feel like for our culture, the most real moments of a lack of control, of you really have no control over you showing up, and you have no control over you dying. The things that really feel like they just happen to you, and that's why both of them honestly scare our culture quite a bit, and we put them all in one building far away that very few of us visit often, is because it makes us uncomfortable. But Ecclesiastes wants us to embrace that lack of control and realizing that the time and the season you're in, you are just in it. And there's not much you can do to get out of it. And there's not much you can do to predict where you're heading. And it's actually a really freeing thing when you think about it. And then he kind of continues, and you can feel like, so what's the point if I find myself in a time of mourning or a time of joy or a time of dancing? Lord forbid. I never want to be in a time of dancing.
One day you
as a Baptist. Whatever. What am I supposed to do then? Because I can't do anything. And he essentially says what you're supposed to do in that is to find the beauty in the season you're in, and also to do what you know is good. That's essentially what it comes down to. And I talked about how, as a youth pastor, I constantly had kids who were always worried about God's will. And especially as they would get older, what's God's will for my life? What does God want me to do? When they got closer to graduating, what career am I supposed to go in? And I got to figure that out, because if I get that wrong, I could be outside of God's will for the rest of my life, and I could be becoming a plumber, but God asked me to be a dancer, and now I've ruined all of God's plan, and they're really trying to figure it out and stressing about it. And I often would tell them, like, yeah, there are things God calls people into specifically. It's not like that doesn't happen. But the bigger thing that God actually, if you read the scriptures, is concerned about isn't you trying to wrestle out what season am I supposed to be headed into. And like Ecclesiastes says, you can't actually know. Like, you actually have no idea what season, and God has made it that humans are limited, that they don't know what season they're in next, or what time is coming, or where this thing is going. And he's like, and the thing you're called to do in that, God's will for your life, is actually just that you see the good in the season you're in, and you embrace that, and then you do the good that you know you should be doing. And that's what he says here, that whether you find yourself in a time of mourning, or a time of joy, or you find yourself in a time of peace, or a time of war, or a time of sowing and mending, or something else, then no matter what season you're finding yourself in, God's will for your life in that moment is to look at what are the good things about this moment that God is calling me to embrace, and to find the beauty in it and the joy in it, in the things that he's doing. And then along with that, what are the good things he's calling me to do? And so for teenagers, I often would say, well, God's will for your life is probably that you're 16. And God's will is that you embrace being that you're 16 right now. You don't need to think about what am I going to do when I'm 30. Embrace being 16. Also embrace math class. You're in math right now. That's actually a season, whether you like it or not, that God has put you in, that you actually should be finding the beauty and embracing it in. And with the doing good, a lot of times teenagers would be so worried about the future. I'd be like, there's lots of God's will right now in your life that you know you should be doing that you're not. And I was like, one of the things is probably like God's will would be things like stop watching porn, stop gossiping, stand up for people who are being bullied. These are things that God has made clear through scripture to you that are the good things he's called you to do, and you're not living into it. And so that's kind of what Ecclesiastes says to us there. And then lastly, he ends up by talking about how God is in control. That we're not and God is. And he spent a long time so far talking about work especially, and effort and toil, and how it's useless. And even if you do something good and you put a ding in the universe like Steve Jobs wanted to do, and that was like his slogan for his life, you have no way of knowing if the person who inherits the good work you did is actually a fool who ruins everything you did. And that's true, that the things we work on as human beings, none of it lasts. And he wants you to realize none of what you're stressed about, nothing, all of the people you care about in 5 generations, no one will even remember. Like all of this stuff just is, all the things we spend all of our time worrying about and stressing about and trying to make matter, actually at the end of the day doesn't last. But that's not true with God, that what God does and what God builds and what God is working on lasts forever. And I talked about Roman roads compared to like modern dishwashers, and how, and it's a small analogy because eventually the Roman roads will die, but for several thousand years we can still look at the Roman roads and they work. Like they actually still are functionable. And this last week my dishwasher died, and we're like amazed that an appliance can last 10 years. Like that's incredible. And it's similar for us, that our lives are like the dishwashers, where the things we do ultimately are not these things that are worth stressing about in a huge, like in the way that they just consume us, in the way we're trying to make 5-year plans and predict the future and control every aspect of our life, that Solomon wants us to realize that we can't do that, but that God can. And the good news about that as followers of Jesus is we know that God is actually building up his church. He's building up those who've chosen to embrace his kingdom. And we talked about how in Philippians, God specifically says he's building us up, and that we will last forever, and those things will last forever. But the times and the seasons we're in are just like times and seasons in real life, that they pass. And for us to embrace that we don't have control. God actually is the one in control. And that can seem really spooky and overwhelming and cause you to have a panic attack like it did for me, or it can be something that's incredibly freeing and lets you let go of the facade of you being your own God. Because you're not. So, yeah. So that's that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm always, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think my favorite thing about the Bible is because it's living, you can reread something that you've read so many times, and all of a sudden something new comes to life or jumps out of the page and goes, oh, like, right. So actually, in light of that, our first question, what I think would be helpful, so whether you're doing this as a group or whether you're just doing this solo, reread the passage. So it's Ecclesiastes 3, 1 to 15, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Take some time to just read it and then answer the question, what stands out to you? You know what stood out to me? We talked about this a little bit. But I was like, oh, I should probably reread it. If I'm going to ask them to reread it, I should do that. And then I didn't get past the first sentence because of that word activity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, there's a twofold significance there. One is that this broken, earthly kingdom, the toil of earth, in a sense, is like constant activity.
Mm-hmm.
And that one day we'll be with Jesus in heaven. And there will be no toil in his presence. And there will be like a fullness of rest, which is just interesting. And then the other interesting thing, we chatted about this a little bit before too, but like just how that word activity also means how we actively engage with these seasons. Like it's not an apathetic, this isn't an apathetic text. It's an active text, which is really interesting. And so we are we're inadvertently here being called to engage, to be faithful in the season that we're in.
Yeah.
And that the seasons themselves might not be good or bad. Like you said, you were talking about mending, like a season of mending could really easily be lovely or it could be really painful.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh man, first verse. Didn't even get through it. That's what I noticed. Okay, I'm going to move to question 2. The main point you kept aligning us to was this. You said you're not in control.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that's true. But even hearing it to the ear, you go, oh, right. I'm not in control. So for you listening, when you hear those words, and if you lean in honestly, how do those words make you feel? Can I throw that at you?
Yeah, it's interesting. You asking that brought up something that I talked to my mentor about when I was hanging out with him. His kids are older now. He's got grandkids of his own. And in being a dad now and thinking about Kaya, my daughter, it's weird because I'm so far away from this. But the biggest thought I had is there's going to come a point, which maybe shows how morbid my thoughts are, where like...
I think I already know what it is.
Kaya's going to exist and I'm not. Aside from some like horrible tragedy, which I hope never happens to us. But there's going to come a time when I can't control my daughter or her world. I can't even know what's going on. And that's crazy. And on the surface, it's actually very disorienting because I, as a parent, want to control it. Not because I need control, but because I care about my daughter, I want to control it. But there's a freeing aspect, and thank God for this aspect, that I am not the one in control of my daughter's life. And there will come a day when she will tell me just as much, probably, that she does not want me to be in control of her life.
Somewhere between the age of 14 and 21.
I'm sure at some point it'll get said. And it's true in that there is anxiety and stress in thinking of that because I care. But there's actually a freeness in recognizing that I don't have control over it and that I know the one who does. And that doesn't mean everything in her life is going to end up the way I hope. It might be bad. But for her to be able, if she could grasp that and embrace this, whatever season she faces, and for me to do the same, and to again look at that if I'm outside of control, what is the thing I can do? Well, God's invited me into seeing the beauty in whatever season that is and pursuing that, and also doing what good I know I should be doing in that season. That there's a lot of peace in something that normally would cause me quite a bit of anxiety. So that's what came to my brain. So I got mixed feelings on it.
Yeah.
But I know the right feeling that actually makes more sense when you break it down. But at first it's very like,
well, yeah, it's unsettling.
Like that.
Oh, I think most people feel the tension of like, this deeply unsettles me and deeply settles me.
Yeah.
There's like a mix. Yeah, I get it. All right. And then kind of in the third portion of your sermon, you talked about how God is God. And in verse 14, it says, everything that God does will endure forever.
Yeah.
Nothing can be added to it or taken away from it. And so, in other words, like how we talked about activity a little bit, it's like God's activity is eternal. It's everlasting.
Yeah.
And so the question I would pose then in light of that is, do you find that truth relieving? Why or why not? And I think that's it for today. Well, thanks for joining us. Aiden, thanks for preaching. And we'll see you on the other side.